Hello and welcome back. So in today's video, we are going to talk about useMemo, which is part of our React Hook series. In this video, we are going to discuss, or we are going to look at the general overview of useMemo. We are going to talk about the implementation of it, and then how we can use useMemo to enhance the performance of our application. So for this and more, let's dive into it. Alright, so use memo hook returns a memoized value, right? So think of memoization as caching a value so that we don't calculate them on every render, okay? So use memo only runs when its dependencies update, okay? So when there is update in its dependency, then it runs. And this can be used to improve the performance of our application. Now going forward, we are going to also talk about use callback in our next video. But then use callback and use memo are quite similar. Okay. The main difference is use memo returns a memoized value, which is a cache value. Okay. And then use callback returns a memoized function. Okay. Now let's focus on use memo, which of course this video is about it. Use memo can be used to keep track of expensive or resource intensive functions from running needlessly. Okay, so if let's say we have an expensive function and we don't want it to run on every render, can use memo to achieve that. Okay, now I have a code here or an example which I would like us to go through it and then get the actual understanding of how use memo works. Alright, so at the top here, I am importing use state, which we are going to be using in this particular example. And then here I have an expensive calculation. Okay, we're going to talk about it in a second. Here I've initialized my use state here. So I have a count state and then I have a to-do state. Okay, and then by default we have 0 and then an empty array here. I have called my expensive function right here, which I'm storing the value here. And then here I have two other functions. Okay, so the first one is increment, just to increase our count variable or account value, and then add to do to add a new to do to our to do list. Okay, now inside here we are kind of using our to do here, so we are mapping our to do and then we are just passing them into a p tag element. Down here we have our count, which we are populating it here, and then we have a button here to kind of increase our count, and then we have the expensive calculation being showed right here. Okay, so I've actually run the application, so I'm just going to check if it's still up and running, and then we'll go to our web browser. All right, so this is how the application looks, and for demonstration purpose I'm going to inspect from our console so that we know what's going on. Okay, so by default, once the application starts, calculating is being called twice. Okay, which is by default how it works. Okay, so it's being called twice. And if you look at the expensive, what basically happens is we pass in the count value, and then this count value comes here, right? And then we go through a for loop. Okay, and then we add 1 to this. So it's basically like we go through a for loop just to delay time. Okay, and then we add +1 to the value and then we return the value. So if you pass in 0, the end resource is going to be 1. Okay, if you pass in 1, the end resource is going to be 2, in that order. So that is our expensive calculation, and we called it here and then we pass in the count. Okay, so basically what happens is when we click on this button, then there should be a render, right? A re-render of the application, and this calculating is going to be called, right? If you click on this to do, see what happens. It adds a new to do and there is some kind of delay. That's why I called it as expensive function, right? When you click on the to do again, the calculating comes again, means the function is being called, the expensive function is called regardless. When you click on this increase button, you could see the calculating is being called, right? And then we see the count has changed. Now let's go back to application. If you look at it, our expensive function depends on the count, not the to do, right? It depends on the count, not the to do. So it's kind of not much, or let me say not a good implementation, because right now whatever we do with the kudos, it kind of affects the expensive function, so it causes it to re-render, which is not, or which isn't the best implementation. Okay, and to avoid this, we can use memo to do that. Okay, so what I'm basically going to do is I'll go to the top here and I'm going to import useMemo. Okay, so I'm going to import useMemo and I'm going to cut this one from there. So cut, and then I'm going to paste the useMemo here, and then the useMemo takes in a function and then the dependency. Okay, so the function, I'm going to use a call. Yeah, I'm going to pass in an anonymous function. Okay, and then I'm going to call my expensive function right here. So expensive, and I'm going to pass in the count, and then it takes in a dependency. Okay, so the dependency will be count. So with this implementation, right, we are using useMemo to monitor the count, and then we are going to only trigger this function when the count value changes. In this case, we are preventing the expensive function from calling, or we are preventing the calling of this expensive function on every render. Okay, so now let's go back to application. Let's restart. Okay, so the calculating is being called twice by default, right? Now when you click on add to do, clearly nothing is happening here, right? But then when we click on the button to increase the count, once the count increases, we get our calculating being called again, right? When we do that again, it's being called again, right? But then when we click on the add to do, nothing happens, right? So we've been able to kind of prevent the expensive function from being called needlessly, right? Which is a great thing, and this, you can achieve this by useMemo. But then before we end this video, I would like to show you another function, which is memo. Okay, so memo basically works like useMemo. Okay, memo, if you scroll down here, basically says it helps you, or it lets you skip re-rendering of components when the props has been changed. Okay, so memo works just like useMemo. Okay, let's say we have a function, or let's say we have a component. So let me I just want to create a simple component right here. Okay, so I'm just going to say try component. Okay, and then this try component returns a value. Okay, let's say try, and then we can call this try component right here. Okay, hopefully everything works. Let me go back here. Wait, let me go back here. Wait, let me save it. Let me refresh the application. Okay, I just want to give you a plus, a bonus. Okay, okay, so we can see the try here, right? So this is a component, right? Now assuming we are passing in a value, so we are passing in the count. So count, and then we are getting the count here. We are getting it as a prop, so count, and then it says it's missing validation. Anyway, you forget about it. Let's go back. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to log the try component right here. Okay, so let's see, load try component. Just a quick one. So let me refresh this side. So we are getting the log try component right here. Okay, let me minimize that section so hopefully you can see it better. Right. So we are getting the try component here. Now when we add a to do, it calls the try component again, even though the try component doesn't depend on it, right? We can use the useMemo to solve it. And in this case, is the memo. Okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to wrap our component with memo. And what it's basically going to do is it will only call this, or it will only re-render this component when prop of the component changes. Okay. So basically that is what happens. So I'm just going to cut this, say memo, then I'm going to paste everything inside because we are going to get some shouts here. So let me just disable it for this file, and then you can also disable. Great. So this is how, and then let's save it. Let's go back to application. Great. Let's try and refresh. Okay. So now our calculating is done. We have our try component. When you click on add to do, you see, so clearly we are not re-rendering the component, right? Until we change the count, it's not going to. You see, after we change the count, now the try component is also working, right? So now we've been able to or now we are being exposed to how we can use useMemo and then memo, right? They basically work the same way. Okay, this one is a React hook, okay, and this one is a function. So basically, or a recap, okay, useMemo are used to prevent unnecessary re-rendering, okay, and it only renders, or it only call or render a function when the count changes. Okay, so it's basically kind of cache the return. Okay, so when it call this function once or during the first run, it stores the value. Okay, and what happens is when there is a re-render, this entire component is being mounted again. But then because we are using useMemo and it has a cache value, it just passes the cache value since there is no change. Okay, so it just passes the cache value, and then the application utilizes that value without calling the expensive function again. Okay, so that is what happens under the hook or under the hood when you are using useMemo. Okay, and then the memo itself basically prevents the component from re-rendering when its prop hasn't changed. Okay, so this is the prop. Until this one changes, there is not going to be re-render. Okay, I think the video is quite long, so I'm going to end it here. I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you did, kindly click on the subscribe button, like this video, share this video with friends, and see you in the next one. Happy coding.